Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It's a joy to be with you today. We got a lot to talk about. In the next hour, we're going to be talking about this attacks on civil rights and civil servants through Doge. What is happening? We see Republican congressmen and women going home, getting, well, I guess they're having to take incoming fire because people are losing their jobs all over the country. The federal government does not simply employ people in Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia. It's all over the country. And people are now beginning to feel it. Some people thought that it was only going to be black people, brown people. No, there's a massive purge of all government people. We got to talk about that. But now we're going to hit two topics in this hour. We're going to be talking about censorship. There were two groups inclusive of the Southern Poverty Law Center who were going to have a Fire Elon ad that was to have been placed in the Washington Post. And the Washington Post, for reasons yet to be disclosed, said no. See, this particular version of the Post gets delivered to the Pentagon and the White House, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they said, no, we're not going to have this huge ad, both pages of Fire Elon. So what do you think is happening here? But first, let's talk about Ukraine. It's got everybody all upset. It's very, very interesting because we're watching this story evolve, right? Many of us, I think most of us want peace. At what cost? It turns out that many of the peace efforts that have been put on the table have been thwarted by the United States, no less. And now you have a president who says we need to end the conflict immediately. And Zelensky's a dictator. Well, that's not something that we're accustomed to hearing in the United States, but in other parts of the world you do. So I guess it depends upon where you are living, where you're getting your news from, and if you really know what's going on in Ukraine, what their history is, and how we got here, and more than that, how we can get out. So this is someone with whom we have been talking about this particular issue now for 3 years. Oh my goodness, Dr. Gibbs. It's been a long time since the very beginning because I found his ideas so intriguing because they are, like he is, rooted in history. So let's talk about it with the author of The Revolt of the Rich. Got to have him back on the show again because we're watching the rich revolt. They've overtaken the government. I want you to, this week, if you would give me an opportunity. Let me know when you will be available for us to tie what your findings about the post 60s period. The post, when we got all these civil rights acts and laws, and really changed the landscape, changed the society, really. And the oligarchs did revolt. They really, really did. And we're seeing it now writ large. So we're going to get right to that. But right now, let's talk about Ukraine. Let's go back. President Trump has said, look, what we need to do is end this conflict. They haven't even brought Ukraine to the table. They said, what we're going to do is talk with Putin directly. Some people are very angry about this. And others are saying, good. Can we get this resolved? Good. Interestingly, Democrats and some Republicans are calling President Trump a traitor. Others are saying, we just need to get this over with. I just want to know how this is such a mixed bag. And when will we get out of this? Hey, Bernadette, Zenobia, Mike, and Andre, everybody like and share. Dr. David Gibbs, what is President Trump saying? What is he saying is going to happen now?
Well, the Secretary of State Marco Rubio is meeting in Riyadh with the Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, having direct face-to-face meetings aimed at ending the war. This really is an extraordinary breakthrough, it must be said, because for 3 years there were no high-level meetings between U.S. officials, between U.S. and Russian officials, between Western Europe or any part of Europe and Russian officials. I think there were a couple of phone calls with um, Olaf Scholz, the now outgoing Chancellor of Germany, but nothing face-to-face that I'm aware of.
Mhm.
And so this is a real breakthrough. I think the general U.S. position was no negotiations, no high-level contacts really at all. Um, I think there's some contacts about things like exchanges of prisoners and that kind of thing, but
Mhm.
no substantive negotiations about anything. Basically, it was almost as if we'd broken diplomatic relations. We didn't formally break diplomatic relations, but we might as well have done so because there were no negotiations. I should add, Zelensky, with applause in the West, not only refused to negotiate directly after some early negotiations in Istanbul, but he actually put forward a decree, a matter of law, making it illegal for the Ukrainian government to negotiate directly with the Russians, as long as Russia occupies Ukrainian territory. Now, Trump has gone against this idea. And the reason he's gone against it, I think the principal one is very simple. Russia is winning on the battlefield in a way that's irretrievable and cannot be reversed. There's simply nothing the U.S. can do about that, or Ukraine or Europe can do about it. The West has played.
So let me establish, despite what we've been hearing in the Western media, Russia is winning.
There's no question about it. If you read very carefully, one can see this. I read The Economist, and they have had articles talking about how the front line is disintegrating. It's just disintegrating. Ukraine simply does not have enough men under arms. It cannot raise a large enough army. The men that they do have at the front are exhausted and are dying in very large numbers. I think it's incorrect to think Russia is suffering a larger number of casualties at this point. It's Ukraine that's suffering them. If you read carefully again in the mainstream Western media, one of the things you find is that Russia is firing at least 5 times as many artillery shells as Ukraine is. I do know enough about the history of warfare that in land wars, artillery is often decisive, and the side with the more artillery usually wins. And Russia clearly has by far the largest amount of artillery. And the West can't outproduce Russia in artillery shells, no matter how hard it tries. Russia just has too much of an industrial capability to produce artillery shells, as well as other munitions. The U.S. has not tried everything in terms of both sanctions as well as delivery of almost every kind of munition. Short of nuclear, of course, and nothing has worked. And so there simply aren't any cards left to play that can turn this around. I should add, all of this could have been avoided because there were repeated efforts at negotiations that the U.S. blocked. Russia did offer a deal that was premised on no NATO expansion. They repeatedly insisted that was the key, and the U.S. flat out refused to give that guarantee. After the war began, there were negotiations in Istanbul that were very promising, that were premised on the idea that no NATO, a return to neutrality by Ukraine. Russia would not keep any of the territory they recently acquired, though they would keep Crimea, which they acquired in 2014, but none of the new territory. The Donbass, the Russian-speaking Donbass area that had been a rebellion, would be settled at a later date, presumably with regional autonomy, which is something the Russians always advocated. And it's perfectly reasonable, by the way, regional autonomy, and the right to use the Russian language. All of these things were being negotiated at Istanbul and were coming very close to ending the war 2 months after it began. And the United States and Britain came down very hard that Ukraine should not continue to negotiate, should break off negotiations. The U.S. and Europe would see to it that Ukraine would win on the battlefield. That'd give them everything they needed to win. And Zelensky foolishly broke off negotiations that could have ended the war within 2 months. And so the real tragedy here is that that wasn't done. And there have been hundreds of thousands of deaths since then that have died for nothing, and that are still dying for nothing, by the way. The war is not yet over. The fighting continues as talks continue. And so I think the real tragedy here that diplomacy was not used. The U.S. was determined to win on the battlefield and to defeat Russia and to deal a blow to Russia's status as a major power. And that was the objective. There really were very aggressive U.S. intentions here. They wanted to overthrow Vladimir Putin and put in some kind of a compliant regime that would do what the U.S. wanted. There was talk about breaking up Russia into microstates, breaking it up into pieces.
Like we did with Ukraine?
Well, I think the idea was, again, Russia's this large sort of super state in terms of at least geographic size. Its population is not large, but its geographic size is vast. And the idea was break it up into pieces. The Russian public was very threatened by this. It wasn't just Putin. There was a U.S. ambassador to Russia who, at the time when NATO declared it wanted to admit Ukraine in 2008, his name was William Burns. He was CI director under Biden, and earlier had been U.S. ambassador. He sent a cable to Washington entitled "Niet means niet, no means no," and he said it wasn't just Putin, but every Russian he talked to, both pro-Putin and anti-Putin, had said it is unacceptable for Ukraine to join NATO because that is just too close to there's this large border, and the Russian people will never accept this. And the United States should have taken that very seriously. I think that maybe they did take it seriously, but they wanted to provoke a war. I really do think this was a provoked war. The United States must have known what it was doing when it continued to insist on NATO admission for Ukraine. And the result is hundreds of thousands of people are dead that didn't have to die. I think Zelensky was very foolish to believe the U.S. would see to it that he won the war. And it was always inevitable Ukraine would be betrayed by the United States. In a certain sense, they were betrayed from the very beginning.
Really?
Henry Kissinger, I'm sorry, go ahead. Santita.
Really? No, I'm saying really.
Henry Kissinger once said something he was somebody, despite his low level of ethics, he was somebody who had a very sharp mind. And he was very good at coming up with intelligent phrases. One of them is that to be an enemy of the United States is very dangerous, but to be a friend is fatal. All right. And I think Ukraine is now figuring that out. And this is where reliance on American promises has led them. It led them to disaster. All of this was predictable, by the way. I remember when it started, I said at the beginning that I don't see any way this ends except with a Russian victory. And so this was a reckless move by the United States. One that, by the way, also put the U.S. at great risk of nuclear war, put all of us at great risk of nuclear war. And so I'm very happy Trump seems to be wanting to shut this down. It's going to be on Russia's terms because that will reflect the fact Russia is winning on the battlefield. When you win the battlefield, that is what happens. But it's better to stop it sooner rather than later, because one way or another, Russia will come out on top of this. And if the U.S. did not want that outcome, we should have negotiated. And the real tragedy, again, is this was not negotiated.
What will be the upside for the United States, if any? Because it appears that Russia, that President Putin and his administration, if you will, are that they are almost relieved to have this over. I mean, to see this come to a conclusion.
Sure.
It appears that I'm sure I can't read any. I certainly cannot read anyone's mind, but it seems to me that they are willing to even go from here into a better relationship with the United States.
Oh yes, I think that is on the agenda. I'm assuming it's on the agenda of both countries to some extent. It's not going to be. There's still going to be a lot of suspicion and hostility because that's inevitable when you have a war like this. But the intense phase of no high-level talks, the U.S. is pretending Russia doesn't exist almost. It seems that is over because we are, as I said, having these high-level talks in Riyadh that were impossible before. Again, Trump is a very strange figure, and obviously he's doing a lot of damage in many areas. You've mentioned the Doge Commission. I see the Doge Commission as just neoliberalism on steroids. I think it's going to end up very badly. There's all sorts of very strange things, like Elon Musk giving the Sig Heil salute. We all saw that. But I don't think that should bias us with regard to everything he does. It doesn't mean every single thing he does is bad. On Ukraine, what he's doing is extremely positive, far better than anything done during the Biden-Harris presidency. And that just has to be acknowledged as a fact. I think that the danger of nuclear war is now far lower than it was, and it was very high before. There was a real risk of nuclear war nobody was talking about, but Now it seems that that's not going to be a real risk. Trump has said other things that are at least sound very positive. He said that he wants to get together, not only with Putin, but with Xi of China, and negotiate a mutual three-way reduction in military spending by 50%, with an emphasis on reducing spending on nuclear weapons, no new nuclear programs. I'm not saying he's going to do that. I wouldn't bet on it. But if he does, that would be an extraordinary achievement. The fact that he's even talking about it is a source of great optimism to me.
Well, Dr. Gibb, right there. I mean, the fact that we're even talking about it, the fact that that's even on the table, I think is such a massive, noteworthy shift.
I agree.
And, I think you have to give credit where credit is due.
Correct.
And you don't have to support an administration. I'm tired of saying that. I think politics is far more complex. People are far more complex than that. I don't like being overrun by these Afrikaners from apartheid South Africa. I don't like it at all. I think it's very dangerous because I think that they are bringing the mentality of white minoritarian rule into the United States. That is dangerous. That having been said, getting us out of this war, because it's a proxy war between the United States and Russia, getting us out of that is important. Ceasing the killing of Ukrainians is important. Getting us away from mutual nuclear destruction is important. What is the ancestral beef with Russia? I don't have it, but clearly somebody has it.
My sense is that it's just a certain intellectual laziness that we got used to the idea of Russia as the enemy when it was the Soviet Union, which was a different country in a completely different situation. In the 1990s, Russia was doing, at least in the early 90s, everything we wanted, pretty much. They were almost a vassal state of the United States. But I think the United States never got over first of all, I think there was a real American effort to come up with an enemy after the Cold War. There really was a sense in Washington, and people said this openly, that they missed the Cold War. They missed the justification it gave for American power, the hundreds of American bases overseas. They missed the justification it gave for the Cold War military budget, which the military-industrial complex missed. There was a whole set of vested interests that had an interest in creating a new enemy. And if you look for a new enemy, you will find an enemy. And I think that it was almost as if the U.S. went out of its way to antagonize Russia. Again, the key element here, there are many elements of this, but the key one is there was a 1990 agreement by the United States, by Germany, by France, by Britain, not to expand NATO into the former communist states of Eastern Europe. And that was a quid pro quo. I mean, it was a basis for Gorbachev agreeing to German reunification. Russia held by its part of the deal, and the U.S. brazenly violated the deal. I think that's why we had a 3-year war in Ukraine, because the U.S. violated that agreement. Had it not violated the agreement, we would not be talking about any of this right now. And I think that there really was a desire to have an enemy to justify U.S. power. In addition, there are other factors as well, as I said, that it was a way, the U.S. did believe that somehow they could defeat Russia. They could knock Russia out of the League of the Great Powers. They could send a shot across the bow to China that this is what we can do to you. If we did this to Russia, we could do this to you. It would reaffirm American power into the rest of the 21st century. Joseph Biden would go down in history as one of the great presidents who reaffirmed American power overseas. Again, I said this before, but it's worth saying again that most American presidents aren't that interested in domestic policy. They're interested in foreign policy. That's what makes a great president, is to be a foreign policy president. And I have no doubt that's how Biden saw the situation. The result has been a disaster. It's been a disaster for everybody involved, including this country. And all of us have paid a price in terms of higher prices for food and energy. It probably also sank Biden's presidency, because the higher prices, that was the main thing that sank his presidency. That's what prevented Kamala Harris from getting elected. In Europe, they've had an even higher price. It's had a major impact on European politics, very negatively. In Germany, it wiped out the party of Olaf Scholz. It raised the profile of the AfD, the very far right-wing party in Germany, to it's the second biggest party in Germany now. All of this, I don't want to say that Ukraine is the only factor, but it was a very big factor. And I do think history will have a very harsh judgment of the people who brought this about.
As we look at just moving forward, um, how do we move forward? My question really is ultimately there's been so much death, so much destruction. Um, how do we move? How do Americans move forward? Because I think that Russians are really they're welcoming the end of this conflict
Yeah.
and they're ready to move on. Americans are still debating the conflict, why we should not move on, why we should still be in the war, even though for the most part our blood's not being shed.
Well,
For the
our
most part, unless they're mercenaries, not
right,
which doesn't diminish because you don't. I think any loss of human life is a tragedy.
agreed.
That having been said, it's they're the ones who have the blood on the floor, if you will, the blood in the soil, the skin in the game. Because I think that much of what Americans have been told, it's a mountain of untruths,
Yes.
and that to me is what's so dangerous, because that to me is shaping the American narrative on this. Dr. Gibbs, I mean, how do we unwind this?
Well, and I do want to say on the propaganda, I've been studying war for most of my whole adult life, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and in all wars, you have a tremendous problem with propaganda and a certain de facto censorship. I mean, it's not and legally you can't do that, of course, because of the First Amendment, but the press censors itself. And I have to say, the propaganda level and the effective censorship has been the worst I've ever seen in my lifetime. Nothing even comes close. It's
Really?
the worst I've ever seen. The nonsense that has been said about the origins of this war in the mass media, about what's going on the battlefield, is so divergent from the reality that it really is extraordinary. It goes beyond the First and Second Gulf Wars. It goes beyond the Vietnam War. It goes beyond anything I've seen. In Europe, it's even worse because they don't have a First Amendment there, and they have formal censorship, the Internet Services Act in the EU. And they're resorting in Europe to extraordinarily anti-democratic means. Just one example, there was a right-wing anti-war party that was about to win the elections in Romania. And so Romania just canceled the election. They canceled it on the very thin pretext that there was Russian propaganda. And that was why they canceled it, because of Russian propaganda. And this was hailed all over Europe. And I'm sure American officials hailed it as well. And this is remarkable that you cancel an election because you don't like the outcome. They were going to get an anti-war, admittedly right-wing candidate, not necessarily somebody I would have voted for, but nevertheless, canceling an election, that's a big step. And that's what happened in Europe. And so the idea is we're fighting for democracy here. It's a bit hard to read that without rolling your eyes, because that's not at all what they're doing. And they're not doing it in Europe, and they haven't been doing it here, because effectively they've deceived the public, denied them basic information, and now we're paying the price for it. Hundreds of thousands of lives have been lost because of that. It affected American politics. It elected Donald Trump. All of these things didn't have to happen if people had used better judgment. I have to say that if Harris had won, I doubt there'd be these kinds of negotiations. I think that she reflects the foreign policy establishment, which had a kind of, shall we say, dead-ender aspect.
Mm-hmm.
They've continued to fight to the bitter end. Russia was going to win anyway, and there's just nothing that can be done about that. But nevertheless, I think had Harris won, the war would have gone on much further. And there would be an increased danger of nuclear war, because who knows what the U.S. would have done if it was faced with outright defeat. There undoubtedly would have been calls to bring in direct U.S. intervention, probably U.S. air power, and that could very easily have led to World War III. So I think Trump is very definitely doing the right thing by settling this at the negotiating table, because it's either the negotiating table or the battlefield. Because either way, it's going to be settled on Russia's terms, and that simply can't be avoided at this point. And if the U.S. wanted to avoid it, it should have been negotiated a long time ago, but the U.S. blocked that.
But why? I know that sounds like a very, very facile question, but
Yeah, it's a fair question. It's an ideology. It's a neoconservative ideology that's taken over the foreign policy establishment that insists military power solves all problems, pretty much. And you don't have to negotiate because you can rely on military force. And that is the ideology in Washington. It's evidently the ideology in Brussels, too. And now we're seeing the full disastrous effects of this ideology. It turns out there's a limit to what the U.S. can do with military power. We're not as powerful as we like to believe we were. And it is having it's having a very negative effect. Even though it's being settled now, that will not bring back to life all the hundreds of thousands of people have died. It will not basically account for the fact that we've lowered our living standards, even more so in Europe than here. It hasn't. It doesn't account for the deindustrialization Germany is undergoing right now. All of this, a lot of this is irretrievable, and all of this is very negative. But it's better to settle it now than wait even further and have even more damage.
How is America relating to Europe, and how does Europe feel about the United States now as a result of this?
One of the things that surprised me is the extent to which Europe pretty much had adopted a position of almost lockstep following the United States, with, as I said, even more censorship of information. I'm really astounded to see countries like Sweden, that had previously been adopted a reasonable attitude, now adopting the same warmongering attitude as everybody else.
Wait, I am trying to figure out how these nations, that they haven't been as non-aligned, say, as Switzerland, but they didn't want to be a part of NATO.
Yeah.
I mean, they said, look, no war. We don't want to be involved in that. We like our part of the world and how we do what we do. What happened?
I don't fully understand it. I think you've had a change in terms of the nature of European elites. Elites in Europe seem to be very different from who they used to be, because you never had this kind of lockstep following of the United States, not just in Sweden, but France was very independent from the United States. Even Britain showed greater independence in earlier times than it's showing now. And it just seems like the entire European continent is following the United States virtually in lockstep. At least it was under Biden and Harris. I mean, Trump is a different story. And so I can't fully explain why you've had this change. The fact is, there isn't a shred of evidence that Russia presents any security threat to Europe, or has any interest or ability to attack Europe. So that's just a complete propaganda invention that this is an issue. I think there's an element of irrationality to this. There's an element of the European and American foreign policy establishments engaging in a flight of fantasy, and a very dangerous flight of fantasy. And we're seeing it now. The fact that they fantasized we would defeat Russia. Well, we can see how that's been playing out. Hasn't worked out at all as they planned it.
Well, just as we project out into the week, because it does appear that that the peace talks, these negotiations are ongoing, and they're very intentional. What's next as you project out?
I don't really know. I mean, there's no question Russia's clearly going to keep all the territory it has conquered, which are all Russian speaking, by the way. It's unclear to me how the people of Crimea definitely wanted to join Russia. I don't think there's any question about that. How the territories they've conquered now, the population feels, is very hard to say. You don't have reliable public opinion polling, but whatever the situation, Russia will keep everything they've conquered. That's a given. That's a certainty. And the U.S. is going to have to give at least some sort of de facto recognition to that. Zelensky insists he won't go along with that, but I don't think Zelensky has no real authority here. He's never really had authority in this. This was just a fantasy that people created. This was always a war between the United States and Russia, with Ukraine being a very minor pawn in this process. As much as we've tried to pump them up into something they're not, they really have no real authority. They've never had any authority. Mm-hmm. And I think we're seeing this in Riyadh, that basically it's the United States and it's Russia. And that's the best way to do it, because that's the most likely to lead to a resolution. I mean, if you brought in other players, it would complicate things tremendously and reduce the possibility of an agreement. What we want is an agreement and an end to the war and the fighting as soon as possible. And a one-to-one U.S.-Russian meeting, that's the best way to do it. What happens after that, I'm hopeful that this will result in a generalized decrease in tensions between the U.S. and Russia. It'll result as well in a decrease in the American overseas footprint, a reduction at least in what has once been called the America's empire of bases, hundreds and hundreds of bases maintained all over the world at enormous expense to the taxpayer, I might add. I think reducing these bases, getting rid of them even, would be a great idea. And if Trump is going to do that, and it looks like he might, I support that. I think that would be very much in America's national interest, in the interest of the American public. And then having further negotiations with Russia and with China about a generalized reduction in tensions, a reduction in military spending, and particularly a reduction in nuclear weapons. If Trump can pull that off, that would be one of the most important moves for peace since 1945. And again, you don't have to like Trump, love Trump, or trust Trump. But if he does something good, we should acknowledge he's done something good. And we shouldn't let our concerns about other issues, which are perfectly legitimate, and we discussed those briefly. We discussed them at length, actually, on this show, in considerable length. We shouldn't let that interfere with the fact that on this issue, he's making positive moves.
Well, maybe if we get past him and say that something good has been done.
Yes.
Because we've personalized our politics so much.
And we do.
It's not about, it's about getting the right thing done. Study war no more. I mean, I'm from that school. Dr. David Gibbs, historian from the University of Arizona. Oh my goodness. It's a lot to take in, but I'm really glad that I've been able to take this apart with you, because it's important for us to really continue to go back over the history so we can understand where we were, therefore how we got here, and maybe peace is on the horizon. I can't wait for it to get here, and then we can move on toward prosperity for everyone.
Excellent idea.
And Dr. David Gibbs, everybody go to Amazon, get the book, The Revolt of the Rich. I'm going to have you on before the week is out, because I think it's high time that we tie your book to what is happening right now.
Great. I look forward to that, Santita.
Because the rich have overtaken the government, but think that we're in deeper financial trouble than we have admitted. And so I think there's a lot going on here. I'd like for us to talk about it, because so much of what you're tying in your book, because I've read it twice now, when you look at the promise of the Great Society and all that we lost when we abandoned it, all that we lost when we abandoned the idea by pouring money into war. Dr. King told us not to do this. Everything he told us not to do, we've done, and look at where we are.
Where we are.
$36 trillion in debt and spending $2 trillion more a year than we take in. It's unsustainable, everybody. Dr. David Gibbs, everybody, the author of The Revolt of the Rich. When you see Elon Musk on that stage with that chainsaw, think of this book. You need to get it. Blessings to you, Dr. David Gibbs, University of Arizona. Sending you so much love today.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Jim Narakis, Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. You've got to subscribe to the magazine Extra! ! Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. And of course, we also can hear you on your podcast.
Counterspin.
Okay. All right. I love it. And I'm always, because, they're almost like my Cliff Notes. You remember when we used to read Cliff Notes?
Yes.
But what was the point? You had to read the book, everybody. But it really does. I can tell you more than Cliff's Notes. You give me great analysis, and you also make me look back at some stories, because sometimes there's so much coming at you every day. You need to step back and examine and connect the dots. And that is what really, quite frankly, fairness and accuracy in reporting, you do it better than anyone. Let's talk about the Washington Post. There's been, I think it would be fair to say, a lot of tumult at the Washington Post. There was an ad, and media, they are paid for by ad buys. Yes, Jim Narakis?
Right.
So, the Washington Post reportedly backed out of running an ad that would not have been a flattering portrait of Elon Musk. Fire Elon. That was the sum total of the ad. And the Washington Post, and it was going to be a huge ad. And this is the version of the Post that is dropped on the doorstep and circulated throughout the White House every day, and the Pentagon. And all of Washington, the Washington Post, everybody, is the newspaper of record in Washington. You do have the Washington Times and the Baltimore Sun and other newspapers, but everybody in Washington, I cannot overstate, reads the Washington Post. In New York, you might prefer the New York Post or the Daily News. Just depends. You know, the New York Times really is a national and an international paper. Everybody in New York reads the Post. Everybody. You don't have to admit it, but you do. I lived there. Yes, I did. When I first moved there, Miss Flack, I stayed with Roberta Flack because I moved up there to sing for her. So, I was there for a while with her before I got my apartment. And she would come in, she'd go out and walk her dogs, and she'd come in with several newspapers. And I was like, I felt like I was in London because, London has like 50 rag sheets. And that's what I love about London, because you just grabbed all of them, because most of them were gossip. Yeah, you had the London Times. Yeah. But I love the Daily Mail and everything else. But I cannot tell people how. I don't think we can describe for people, certainly unless you live there. And I went to school there, lived there for a minute, just how important the Washington Post is to Washington and Washingtonians. They even have a really robust local section. And for Jeff Bezos, who already decided to do something that was incredible. Jim, he said, we're not going to endorse a presidential candidate. They never do that. Talk to me. What is going on at the Post? What did they do? This was a lot of money, Jim.
I mean, I think, the reason that he said that they weren't going to offer an endorsement is because he felt that it was important for newspapers to seem neutral and to not seem like they're taking sides. And then the guy goes and stands behind Donald Trump at his inauguration alongside Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg. So much for neutrality, right? Clearly that is not the actual reason that he's doing this. And that's not the reason that he killed this ad.
On the front row.
Right. Right. In front of the cabinet. The more important than the cabinet are the billionaires, who are the billionaire supporters of Donald Trump. And that's his core constituency right there. The Common Cause and the Southern Poverty Law Center had this ad that was saying fire Elon Musk, because he's an unelected, unconstitutional person who's killing federal agencies.
And the country.
A valid point of view. And before they gave them the ad, the ad department at the Washington Post showed them a thank you Donald Trump ad that was a wrap around the Washington Post, I believe from fossil fuel company. Mm-hmm. And that was here's the kind of ad that we wrap around our paper. So it's okay to say thank you Donald Trump. That doesn't compromise the paper's neutrality, but apparently fire Elon Musk, that makes the paper unneutral. So it's not about neutrality. It's about signaling to the Trump administration that the Washington Post is on their side. Is going to block criticism. They fired they killed a cartoon because it showed the billionaires, paying homage to Donald Trump, and that was something that you're not allowed to make fun of in the Washington Post.
What are they doing, Jim?
Well, Jeff Bezos, he's the second or third most richest person in the world, depending on how you calculate it. And his wealth does not come from the Washington Post. It comes from Amazon and from Blue Origin, his space company. And Amazon, you think of it as like the place where you go to do online retailing, but it's also a cloud computing company. and that is one of its most profitable enterprises. And one of the big customers is the federal government. The federal government has, oceans of data that they have to keep track of, and they need computer services to hold that data. And Amazon is one of the big purveyors of data storage, of cloud storage, for places like the Pentagon, like the Central Intelligence Agency. And so, this is massive amounts of money that go from the federal government to Amazon and indirectly or to Jeff Bezos. And he wants that to keep happening. And Donald Trump is someone who, one of the things that he really believes in deep in his heart is revenge. He believes that if someone crosses you, you should get back at them. And people like Bezos, like Mark Zuckerberg, understand this very well. And they understand that the federal government has lots of tools that they can use to get back at a company like Amazon, directly by canceling contracts, which already happened in the first Trump administration. Amazon had to go to court to get a piece of the cloud computing contracts that they had been getting previously. But indirectly, the tech industry, it's highly regulated. There is so much that the government can do to change the way that the flow of data around the internet works, to make a company more or less profitable. And that is why companies that had previously, expressed at least a gesture towards being part of the resistance to Donald Trump during the Trump's first term are now lining up to show how supportive they are, and how not a threat, and how really they think that he is great, because he's also Trump is extremely susceptible to flattery.
But wait, Jim.
Sure.
They are the press, newspaper. They talk about democracy dies in darkness. Isn't that their motto?
Yeah.
Okay. And so does the truth.
Right.
I don't know how I am supposed to believe them. I don't know how I am supposed to believe them when they don't disclose the challenges that they've had with President Trump previously.
Right.
At some point, I know it's very hard to do, but you say, you know what, it's business, everybody. I don't need this heat. Now, people might be critical of you, but guess what? They'll say, well, it's censorship, right?
Yeah.
Somebody needs to say something. Don't you think the public is owed that?
Yeah, I feel that the fact that this ad was killed is in itself a bad thing, because
what was your reaction?
Groups should be. I think groups need to be able to communicate through advertising. Is one way that nonprofit groups are able to get their message across. There's a lot of messages that are not going to be gotten to the public except directly through paid advertising. But I think the more important thing is that this is a sign that the Washington Post is chiefly concerned not about making money for the Washington Post as a journalistic outfit, but in serving as a way to convey to Donald Trump and the Trump administration and to Elon Musk that they are not a threat. And that is going to affect the journalism of the paper that, as you say, is the paper that is read overwhelmingly more than any other paper in Washington, D.C., is not going to have hard-hitting exposés of the Trump administration. if they're afraid to run an ad, how much less likely are they to do enterprise reporting that actually gets at, the favors, the corruption,
But here's the thing.
the
Let me
damage being done by the Doge.
maybe I've seen too much. I know that all these prosecutions are political in nature. They're selective. Therefore, they are selective. There's a reason. Someone was pointing out to me that legacy civil rights people don't get a second generation of life, but the imperialists live over and over. Their children live over and over and over and over again. Look, breaking news. Did you just see that MSNBC canceled Joy Reid show?
Oh no.
Yeah. Let me read this to you. I was going to go someplace other than, of course, all the right-wing outlets are publishing it first. Oh my gosh. I like Joy Reid. Let me reach out. MSNBC, according to this CNN report, Joy Reid will host her final evening news show with MSNBC this week. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Robert. Robert brought this up to me, Robert Williams. She will host her final evening news show with MSNBC this week as part of a slate of programming changes by Rebecca Cutler, the network's new president. Sources familiar with the network reported to CNN. According to sources, Cutler plans to replace the readout, which is aired from 7 p.m. which is aired at 7 p.m. Eastern time since 2020, with co-hosts from The Weekend, Simone Sanders Townsend, Michael Steele, and Alicia Mendez. The Weekend, a 2-hour show airing on Saturday and Sunday mornings at 8 a.m., improved total viewership during its time slot by 35%. Before the readout, Reid hosted the MSNBC Weekend Show AM Joy from 2016 to 2020. And it just goes on and on and on. And we also know that they're looking at NBC is looking at loosing itself of MSNBC. So
yeah, MSNBC was never meant to be a liberal network, let alone a progressive network. It was owned originally by General Electric and Microsoft, and then just by General Electric, and now by Comcast. And these are companies that have no interest in promoting a left alternative to, the status quo. That is not what they're about. They are about making money from the status quo. And they wanted MSNBC to be another Fox originally. Mm-hmm. And if you look at like the history of MSNBC going back, they were always trying to find right-wing hosts. Like Oliver North had an MSNBC show.
It was Roger Ailes' baby.
Joe Scarborough is kind of the legacy of the original idea for MSNBC. He's a Republican Congress member, and the thing is that there's already a Fox, mm-hmm. And people who are into right-wing media have their show, have their station. They're not going to switch over to that slot is taken to the extent that it's possible to have a centrist, middle of the road network, which is I think quite difficult. That CNN has filled that spot. The only slot that is available is being left of center. Mm-hmm. That is the only commercially viable persona for MSNBC to have, and the corporate owners hated this idea. They did everything they could to avoid having MSNBC be a station that catered to the left, and when you had popular people on MSNBC, they tended to get canceled. Like Phil Donahue, who was the biggest star on the station.
Well, they were trying to start the network. It was the biggest show on the network, but because he was pro peace, They let him go.
Right.
They killed
Right.
the show.
Yeah. And these are there's stations that are supported by advertising, by corporate advertising. Corporations are not looking to put their messages next to people talking about how the rich have too much power in our country, which is, you can't have a genuine left media that is not anti-corporate. Because corporations are the power structure in this country, and if you're not challenging corporations, you're not challenging the power structure from the left. So there's a built-in contradiction of trying to have a left-wing network that is commercially supported. It's very difficult to pull that off, and despite the fact that really the only viable option in finding an audience for MSNBC is the left audience, which is the audience that is traditionally underserved in corporate media. So it's not surprising that when MSNBC thinks, hey, let's have let's shake things up, that the people who go are the leftmost people on the outlet. Those are the people that have never, corporate have never wanted those people on the show. They are happy to see them go, because there's a contradiction between a corporate network supported by corporate advertising having a host on who is going to have an anti-corporate point of view.
Well, okay, we've gone from fire Elon Musk. That's a no-go at the Washington Post. MSNBC release Joyanne Reed, and they will release others because they're refashioning. But I think that the whole landscape is being refashioned. I only have a couple of minutes left. What is the way forward? What should we be watching out for? Because you know what, it seems like every day you have whiplash, Jim.
Yeah.
Because I don't know what's going to happen by the end of the day.
I feel like FAIR has always been about the need for independent media. That corporate media is never going to give us the information that we need. It's never going to host the discussions that we have to have, and that is ever more true. The having an administration that is more openly willing to punish dissent of any kind, using the regulatory bodies, using the courts. The new FBI director has promised to bring prosecutions against media for reporting things that the Trump administration doesn't want reported. The corporate media are cowed. They are running. The fact that big media companies like Disney, like CBS, are giving millions of dollars to Trump to pay off lawsuits that are ridiculous. There's no, when Trump is suing CBS for editing an interview with Kamala Harris, that's an absurd. There's no legal basis for that lawsuit, but CBS is talking about settling it because it's more important to keep on the good side of Donald Trump, and nothing says, "Hey, Donald Trump, we like you," than giving him millions of dollars. That's his favorite thing.
But and the oligarchs, because quite frankly, if you try to tell the truth and speak for people, speak to and for the needs of the disenfranchised, corporate media on the right and the left do not want you. And I think we have to just look at that. Donald Trump is what he is writ large. But the fact is, we all get the same stories from everybody all the time when they want to go to war. And this is the same instrument that when someone was talking about peace and had gotten traction with the American public. I mean, Donahue's numbers were exploding on the network. It was growing the network. They threw him out. They threw him under the bus. They didn't care about his ratings. It was his message that was offensive. And I think we need to look at that and be really, really aware, which is why I'm so grateful to you and Janine and your team at FAIR, because I know I can find the truth with you. You're going to tell me. You're going to tell me, wait a minute, watch this line, watch how the media are pushing Kamala Harris to the right. That's not where she wants to be, but they're pushing her. So you're giving us a media education, literally, every day. Get their newsletter, sign up for the podcast, give them the support, get extra, exclamation point, newsletter. Oh yeah. They need and deserve your support because they support us. I got 1 minute. What do you want to say before we go?
Well, I do want to say that there has never been more of a need for independent alternative media than there is today. For people who are willing to say what needs to be said, regardless of whether it offends the powerful, offends the oligarchs. I think we need to look for structures that are outside the corporate media, things like Mastodon, maybe Blue Sky. These are ways that we can communicate, and we are going to need to be able to communicate with each other through the tough times ahead.
That's right. Well, I want to thank you for that. And I want to thank you and Janine for all of the work that you do every day. Now, I can't wait to see what you're going to write in the next couple of days.
Janine sends her love, by the way.
I give her my love. I love her.
Yeah.
When you all were just starting your family, she was pregnant. And now she's got an adult. I'm like, I'm old. Yeah. That's all right.
It's her 21st birthday tomorrow.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Oh, wow. All my love. Would you let them know I remember the pregnancy? Couldn't do the Keep Hope Alive show because she was so late in her pregnancy. Oh, my God. Bless your heart. I love it. I love it. And I love you. God bless you.
Thanks.
Happy birthday.
I'll tell her.
Made you a papa.
Yep.
God bless you. All righty. God bless everybody. In the next hour, let's talk about the attack on civil rights and civil servants. What do you think about that? That's what's happening. Civil rights and civil servants are under attack. That's right. Millions of workers are looking at being laid off or fired. If you're laid off, you have certain rights. If you're fired, you lose certain rights. Let's talk about that in the next hour of the Santita Jackson Show. Everybody meet me on over there. Hey, Miss Wanda, Carol, my sister from another mister, sending you my love. Back in just a minute on the Santita Jackson Show, AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota.